Hello there, you scublords, and welcome back to another episode of Devblog Chats. This is your host, Many Miles Away, and today we're going to be talking about a very interesting development that came up yesterday. I'm recording this actually on the 8th and putting it up on the 8th, but regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed that little intro there. I got that idea last night as I was talking to a friend. Shout out to him for giving me the idea. But I digress. You guys are here for me to talk about this machine and ramble on for 10 to 15 minutes or so, waste some of your time. Anyways, let's get on with doing that. So the IS-6, not a lot of people know very much about this machine, other than the fact that it's in World of Tanks. It's one of the oldest premiums, I believe, in World of Tanks. I think it was one of the first. And it's a very well protected tank. It has very good standing in World of Tanks as a tier 8 premium heavy tank, and it's also going to be a premium here in War Thunder. Now, whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, I will leave that up to you after I have talked a little bit about the vehicle, and I'd like to hear your guys' opinions down in the chat. I will give my opinions near the end of the video about the vehicle, so without further ado, let's get on with its development history. Now, before I start, I want to differentiate something. There were two vehicles developed for the IS-6 project. There was the Object 252 and Object 253. What we are getting in War Thunder is an amalgamation of both of these vehicles. Now, if Object 252 sounds familiar to some of you, it's because World of Tanks just introduced it as a completely overpowered tier 8 premium in their game. And it looks something like this. If you look at any of these historical photos like this, and then you compare it to the Wargaming's model, they look kind of familiar, but the hull shapes are completely different. Also, the vehicle initially was not actually called IS-6, it was just Project, or Object 252, or Object 253, and both of these vehicles were conceived as possible replacements for the IS-2. They were essentially project competitors. However, they were dropped in favor of the IS-2 Mod 43, which is really an IS-6. They do this all the time. A good example of this is just what they released in the last patch as well, the Panzerkampfwagen 7 as their tier 10 heavy tank, or one of their new tier 10 heavy tanks of the Germans. They also call that something else. It's called the Luva. There were several different designs drawn up for the Luva. One of them had a rear-mounted turret. One of them had a traditional mounting, which is and they have both iterations in World of Tanks, and neither of them were built. In any case, we're not here to talk about the Luva. So the IS-6 project was developed at plant number 100 in Chelyabinsk. I'm sorry for all the Russians watching, or Eastern Europeans. I'm going to be butchering these names really badly. And the main feature of Object 253, which is kind of what we have in War Thunder, is the use of an electromechanical transmission. Now, what this electromechanical transmission allows you to do in practice, essentially, is it allows you to have the same top speed going forwards and going in reverse. So the top speed of the IS-6 and the 253 configuration with the electromechanical transmission is 35.4 kilometers per hour, which is not bad for a heavy tank. And it's going to be able to do this in both directions, at least in theory. Now, it looks to me that we also have the turret of the Object 252. So we've got the 253 transmission, but we've got the turret of the 252, which makes for an interesting vehicle that they're putting in the game. Now, this is going to be a premium vehicle. It's going to be tier 4, and it's going to be priced at $40 US. Convert that into whatever local currency. And for what you're getting for the Soviet tier 4s, that's actually not too bad, considering the fact that Wargaming generally sells their premiums, their top-end premiums at above $50 US. I think, personally, that Gaijin's getting us a better deal here. Now, as for the vehicle's gun, you'll notice the gun is a little bit different. What kind of gun does it have? Well, it has a 122mm gun known as the D30T. And essentially what the D30T is a modification of the D25T 122mm gun. This one's got a different muzzle brake, which, according to Chugelblitz on the forums, is actually the wrong muzzle brake on this gun, and it should have a very, very similar muzzle brake to the D25T 122mm gun. It's got a bore evacuator, or a fume extractor, and it also has a loading rod, which allows you to load the shells a little bit faster, and I believe I've read somewhere that the breech was modified to allow easier loading. That might be the presence of the loading rod. And basically what that's going to allow you to do is to have a slightly better rate of fire. So what we can expect, my best guess personally, this is not confirmed by any stretch of the imagination, so take what I say with a grain of salt. My best guess for this thing's rate of fire is going to be about 5 to 6 rounds a minute. So anywhere between 20 at the lowest and about 12 at the highest. That's about where I'd put it, because that would put it in a similar ballpark as like the T-29, for example. And as for ammunition, don't get your hopes up too high, because this is a 1943-1944 prototype. So it would have no better ammo, most likely, than, say, the IS-2 Mod 44. But what you're getting in return is a much, much better all-around armored vehicle. Sure, the mobility may not be as high as, say, the IS-2, but in terms of raw top speed. However, because of this electromechanical transmission, I keep trying to say electromagnetic, but bear with me. Electromechanical transmission, you can do this in both directions, meaning that this can be an incredibly mobile tank despite having a relatively low top speed. What this allows you to do is use this as a breakthrough tank, and that's essentially what this vehicle was designed for. And the vehicle was basically the alternative design that could have become the IS-2. However, the Soviets decided to go with the IS-2 Mod 43 instead. What basically they did was they angled the hull all the way around. They changed a few things in the running gear, like they made smaller road wheels, which would eventually go on to other Soviet heavy tank projects like IS-4 and IS-7. Like the hull shape was taken directly from the IS-6 and put onto the IS-4. So this vehicle, despite what people are saying, though, is not going to be as overpowered as many people are making it out to be. For one, the thickest armor on the hull is 120 millimeters thick. Now, it's sloped back at 65 degrees, and that's the driver's hatch, meaning that its effective armor thickness comes out to just over 200 millimeters of effective armor. And frankly, that's about as much armor on the driver's hatch alone as the T-54 Mod 1947. And the T-54 Mod 1947 is not that great of a threat. It's not a bad vehicle by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not overpowered either. It's just a decent all-around average medium tank. And like I said, this 120mm armor plate is only on the driver's hatch. Everywhere else is 100mm in the front, on the hull. Lies. I just realized this post-editing that I forgot to mention the lower plate. The lower plate is actually 120mm thick, much like the driver's hatch. It's angled less at 56 degrees, I believe, rather than 65 degrees from the vertical. However, its effective thickness comes out to about just over 200 millimeters, like I said, for the driver's hatch. The turret, however, is a very, very different story. The turret has a 150mm base armor around the front of the gun mantlet, so it's technically weaker than the King Tiger. But the gun mantlet itself is also another 150mm just plopped on top of that. So on the gun mantlet itself, the effective thickness there is about 350 millimeters of armor. Raw thickness, it's about 300. So shooting this thing in the gun mantlet, unless you have ridiculously high penetration, is not likely to go through. However, if you look closely at the front of the turret, you will see that there is a bulge if you're looking at the front of the vehicle, on the left-hand side of the turret. And looking at some armor viewers for World of Tanks, that area right there is only about 150 millimeters thick, meaning that a King Tiger will be able to penetrate the front of this thing's turret if it hits that small weak spot out to easily a kilometer. So this vehicle, despite having very good armor all the way around, is not infallible. It's going to be tough, yes. It's going to be able to dictate an engagement in close quarters. This thing is going to be a straight-up brawler, just so you know. If you think you're just going to sit in the back of the map with this thing and pick off enemy tanks at long range, then you're doing it wrong. This thing lives to be up in the enemy's face and just blasting them with that big 122mm gun. Kind of like what the IS-2 was sort of supposed to do, but this thing's got armor. The two shells, though, that are really going to give this thing trouble are HeatFS, obviously. HeatFS is kind of a given, and HESH. Because most HESH rounds, actually I'm pretty sure all HESH rounds, have a minimum base, quote-unquote, penetration of 145mm, and that's on everybody else except for the British. The British, on the other hand, have 150mm of quote-unquote penetration with HESH, meaning that they can one-shot the IS-6 in the hull just by hitting it with HESH. So, yeah, it's great to have all that armor, but if you're getting hit with HESH, it's not going to save you. The vehicle is going to depend heavily on getting in close and intimidating its opponents into making a mistake. And a good player will, after studying the vehicle, will know to keep calm and aim at the weak spots and take this thing out. It's also got 150mm on the cupolas, and unless you've got APHE, that's not really that much of a viable option. There's also technically a possibility you can probably pen through the frontal turret with HESH, but that's very, very unlikely. And it's just... what I'm getting at here is that the IS-6 is not going to be the invincible juggernaut that the initial community is going to make this thing out to be. It's got strengths, yeah, and it's going to be a tough tank to kill, especially for the Germans, but the Germans are getting like the RU-251. Now, I'm not saying that a premium vehicle should be needed to carry an entire tier of vehicles, but what I'm saying is that this is probably one of the few vehicles, apart from the T-29, that's actually going to be able to match a King Tiger in brawling and medium to long range combat. Actually, not even long range, just close to medium range, because I think anything past 500 meters, with the ammunition types I'm expecting this vehicle to get, which are just the same ammo types we have on the other two ISs, or the other two IS-2s, it's not going to be able to penetrate the frontal turret armor of a King Tiger past, like, 600 meters or something like that. So this thing is going to have to get in close, and it's going to be able to, because the King Tigers are going to have difficulties penetrating its frontal armor, especially at long range. The King Tigers are going to have to get in close if they want to have a hope of getting through the IS-6's frontal plate. Vehicles like the Sturrer Emil might be able to get through the frontal plate. It's kind of dubious, so I'll have to do some testing. The Jagdtiger should be able to get through the frontal plate, although T-54s have proven that even if they have 100mm of armor, they can still bounce 128mm shells for some reason, but I digress. But like I said, the gun mount is basically going to be off limits. The likelihood of you getting penned through there is maybe quite minimal, unless there's some sort of armor hole behind it, which sends fragments back and takes out the gun breach, kind of like on the IS-3. We'll have to wait and see once we get in game how it fares. Now, am I going to be getting the vehicle? Yes. Guy just going to provide one for me so I can make some videos on it. I might make a good follow-up video on the vehicle and give you guys my initial thoughts on it, maybe like another first impressions video like I did with the Type 62. And we'll see how it turns out in game. So that's basically all I have for you guys today. There was also actually that's a lie. There was the 76mm Russian flak truck that was announced yesterday as well. However, there isn't much to say on it. It's a truck with a 76mm anti-aircraft gun on it. So, kind of interesting, but it's nowhere near... It doesn't take the cake anywhere near as much as the IS-6 would. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Leave your opinions down below of the vehicle, and without further ado, keep your tracks checked, keep your binos in place, keep around on the tube, and I will see you guys in the next video.